The United Nations General Assembly voted over the weekend for an immediate humanitarian truce, 120 nations voting in favour, 14 against, including the US and Israel. Australia, along with the United Kingdom, abstained. Does that diminish the government's support, its stated support for Israel and its right to defend itself?
Of course it does. We should have been standing with our long-standing allies, including the United States, in support of Israel. The fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu hasn't yet taken a phone call from Anthony Albanese 3 weeks into, or 3 weeks post the 7th of October, is a very significant moment for us to contemplate. There have been world leaders who have stood by the Israelis. They've gone to Tel Aviv. They've been very vocal in their support following the terrorist attacks. Our Prime Minister hesitated, didn't put a call in initially, has refused to go to Tel Aviv to provide that moral support and a statement that civilised countries and allies will stand with Israel against the barbarity of terrorist attacks, slaughter of children and women, the abduction of elderly ladies. And the Prime Minister had an opportunity here in the United Nations to send a clear message about our values and where we stand, and he failed that test. And I think it was an incredibly weak display of leadership from the Prime Minister. He should have been standing with President Biden. He makes a lot of the relationship, as we just saw in the interview then. America's our most important ally, particularly in an uncertain time. And to see the Prime Minister parading around on the red carpet, but then squibbing it when it comes to the tough decisions, I don't think that's in our country's best interests.
Can Australia achieve the two things that the government's trying to do, though, now? That is, condemn Hamas and back Israel, but also argue for the protection of civilian life?
Well, Hamas is making it very difficult when they're telling civilians to stay in situ and not to move and not to take opportunity to exit Gaza. They're being used as human shields. That's what Hamas is doing, and that's what terrorist groups do. They use the propaganda of innocent people being the victims of war. And the difficulty for Israel is that Hamas wants to wipe them off the map. And that's the problem for a lot of Australians. It upsets me greatly that you hear people talking about or invoking the atrocities of Hitler, where 6 million Jews were gassed. This is the biggest attack on Israel, the biggest loss of life since that time. And this is something that can't be ignored. So we need to provide a solution, but that can't be done when you've got a terrorist organisation recognised in Australia as such, going around beheading people and trying to conduct these attacks on Israeli soil. It's just not something you can contemplate.
The PM didn't go to the Middle East, as you suggested he should, as part of that visit to the United States, to have a detour and head to the Middle East. Would you consider going to Israel as a show of support in your capacity as opposition leader?
Well, Kieran, I've certainly given it consideration. My judgment is that that's not the best use of my time. I think for opposition leaders to go to Israel to expect a meeting with the Prime Minister is not something that is the best approach. The leader of our country, the Prime Minister, is the person with authority who needs to go there and send a very clear statement that we reject the attacks of Hamas, that we stand with Israel, we'll support the people of Israel, and that would be a very strong message that he could send. But the fact that he failed to even call the Prime Minister of Israel and now hasn't even had a call to this day, I hope that it's possible within the next day or two or whenever it might be. But it's a very clear message when Prime Minister Netanyahu has met with and telephoned or taken calls from many of the world leaders who share our values, and that Australia is left out of that. That is not something our country should be proud of, and the Prime Minister should apologise for that. It's the same illogical approach that the Prime Minister had when he didn't call a National Security Committee, where in the opening days they should have been pre-positioning assets in Al Minhad to evacuate Australian citizens. They should have been contemplating what DFAT needed to do to protect our equities in the region, to understand what was going to happen if there was a spillover through the northern border with Australian citizens who are in Lebanon. None of that was contemplated. Instead, the Prime Minister was obsessed on the voice and didn't have the ability to deal with those two issues. And I think most Australians were jarred by that. And I think the Jewish community here in Australia was totally shocked by it. And the Prime Minister, I don't think, has found his stride since then. And it's evidenced by the lack of leadership in the UN vote. And it's also evidenced by allowing people like Tony Burke to free range on an issue that's very important here in Australia.